James Cameron's 1989 underwater epic pushed filmmaking boundaries so far that actors nearly drowned, marriages dissolved, and crew members' hair turned white from toxic conditions. Behind the Academy Award-winning visuals lies one of Hollywood's most punishing productions, involving real drowning rats, abandoned nuclear reactors, and on-set mutinies. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the abyss. Fact 1. Filmed in an abandoned nuclear power plant. When James Cameron needed a location to film The Abyss, he didn't choose a typical Hollywood soundstage or even a tropical ocean setting. Instead, he picked one of the most unusual filming locations in cinema history, an abandoned nuclear power plant in Gaffney, South Carolina. The Cherokee nuclear power plant had been left unfinished in the early 1980s after Duke Power ran into economic problems and halted construction, leaving behind massive concrete containment structures that had never been used. Cameron saw an opportunity where others saw industrial ruins. His team converted the reactor's containment vessel, a cylindrical structure 200 feet across and 55 feet deep, into what became the world's largest freshwater underwater filming tank. They filled it with 7.5 million gallons of water, creating an environment where actors and crew would spend months submerged, filming 40% of the movie's scenes completely underwater. The location choice was driven by Cameron's need for total control over the filming environment, something that would have been impossible in the open ocean where the story was supposedly set. The sheer scale of the operation was unprecedented. Beyond the main containment vessel, the production also modified the turbine pit to hold another 2.2 million gallons of water for additional underwater sequences. After filming wrapped in December 1988, the production went so far over budget that 20th Century Fox decided the cost of dismantling the elaborate sets was too expensive, so they simply left everything in place. The massive underwater sets remained abandoned inside the nuclear plant for 19 years, slowly rusting and deteriorating until they were finally demolished in 2007, when Duke Energy announced plans to build a new nuclear facility on the site. Fact 2. Ed Harris nearly drowned multiple times. Ed Harris came terrifyingly close to dying on the set of The Abyss, and the most dangerous incident happened during one of the film's most intense sequences. Harris was filming a scene deep underwater where his character had to hold his breath inside a helmet filled with liquid while being towed 30 feet below the surface of the massive tank. When he ran out of air and gave the emergency signal for oxygen, his assigned safety diver got tangled up on a cable and couldn't reach him in time. As Harris desperately needed air, another crew member swam over to help and handed him a backup regulator, which is the breathing device that connects to an oxygen tank. But in the chaos and urgency of the moment, the crew member inserted the regulator upside down into Harris's mouth, which caused the actor to suck in a lungful of water instead of the air he desperately needed. Harris later recalled that for a split second, he genuinely thought he was going to die right there on the film set. Fortunately, the underwater cinematographer Al Giddings saw what was happening, immediately ripped out the upside-down regulator and gave Harris his own backup air supply in the correct position, saving the actor's life. The experience was so traumatic that Harris broke down crying while driving home from the set that evening. He admitted in interviews years later that he felt disappointed in himself for not being able to handle the situation, but he was also angry that he had been put in such a dangerous position in the first place. This wasn't even the only time Harris nearly drowned during production, as he had several other close calls while filming scenes without proper diving equipment at the bottom of the submerged set. Fact 3. Real rats actually breathed liquid. One of the most memorable and unsettling scenes in The Abyss shows a rat being submerged in a pink liquid and actually breathing it. And what most viewers don't realize is that this scene was completely real, with no special effects or movie tricks involved. The liquid in question was oxygenated perfluorocarbon, a real substance that had been tested in scientific experiments for decades as a potential way for humans to survive extreme depths underwater without compression. James Cameron consulted with doctors Johannes Kielstra and Peter Bennett from Duke University, who had pioneered liquid breathing research, and they gave the production team detailed instructions on exactly how to prepare the fluid and safely conduct the experiment on camera. The production actually filmed the scene 5 separate times using 5 different rats because they needed multiple takes to get the shot right. And every single rat survived the experience without any lasting harm. After each take, the rats were held upside down to drain the fluid from their lungs and then received antibiotic shots from a veterinarian, since the liquid temporarily removes a protective coating inside the lungs. The most surprising behind-the-scenes detail is that the only reason the filmmakers cut away from the rat during the scene wasn't because of any danger to the animal, but because the panicked rats would defecate in the fluid from momentary fear as their bodies adjusted to breathing liquid instead of air. Despite Cameron's assurances that no animals were harmed, the American Humane Association declared the film unacceptable because the rats' visible stress and panic constituted animal cruelty in their view. Ironically, the rat that appeared in the rest of the movie as the character's pet died of natural old age just a few weeks before the film premiered in theaters. Fact 4. Cameron's divorce mirrored the plot. The central love story in The Abyss between the estranged couple Bud and Lindsay Brigman wasn't just a fictional screenplay device, but rather a direct reflection of James Cameron's real-life marriage falling apart during the making of the film. Cameron had married producer Gail Ann Hurd in 1985 after they collaborated together on The Terminator, and she went on to produce his next film, Aliens, before they decided to work together again on The Abyss. However, by the time Cameron was writing the screenplay in 1987, their marriage was already showing serious cracks, and he ended up basing the character of Lindsay directly on Hurd herself. The two separated during the pre-production phase of The Abyss as the cast and crew were preparing to begin filming, and they officially divorced in February 1989, which was just 2 months after principal photography wrapped. This meant that Cameron and Hurd were going through the painful process of ending their marriage while simultaneously working together every single day on a film about a divorced couple trying to reconnect and save their relationship. The awkwardness and tension of this situation must have been incredibly difficult for everyone involved in the production, as the two had to maintain a professional working relationship despite their personal lives crumbling. Making the situation even stranger, the uncomfortable dynamics between Cameron and Hurd during this period likely added an extra layer of authenticity to the performances, since the actors were witnessing a real-life estranged couple working through their issues right in front of them on set. Despite the painful circumstances, Hurd remained committed to the project and saw it through to completion in her role as the film's sole producer. Fact 5. Chlorine turned actors' hair white. The water conditions inside the massive tanks at the Cherokee nuclear power plant created a toxic environment that literally changed the physical appearance of the cast and crew who spent months submerged during filming. Because the tanks held millions of gallons of water that would sit stagnant for extended periods. Algae began blooming rapidly in the warm South Carolina climate, sometimes reducing visibility to just 20 feet within a matter of hours. To combat this problem and keep the water clear enough for filming, the production team added massive amounts of chlorine to the tanks, but they seriously over-chlorinated the water to dangerous levels. The result was that actors and crew members who spent 10 to 12 hours a day underwater for weeks on end began experiencing severe chemical burns on their exposed skin, and the chlorine started stripping the color right out of their hair. Ed Harris, who spent more time underwater than almost anyone else on the production, watched helplessly as his hair literally turned white from the chemical exposure over the course of filming. Other cast and crew members had their hair turn various shades of green from the combination of chlorine and other chemicals in the water. To protect themselves, everyone had to slather Vaseline all over their hair and any exposed skin before going underwater for extended periods. But even this precaution wasn't always enough to prevent the damage. The chlorine also caused painful skin irritation and burns that made the already grueling working conditions even more unbearable. Some crew members who spent the most time at the deepest parts of the tank, working at 50 feet down for 5 hours at a stretch, suffered the worst effects and ended up with hair that was completely bleached or stripped of its natural color by the time production finally wrapped. Fact 6. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio walked off set. One of the most emotionally intense scenes in The Abyss shows Ed Harris's character desperately trying to revive Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's character after she drowns. And the filming of this scene pushed the actress past her breaking point in a way that led to a dramatic on-set confrontation. The scene required Mastrantonio to lie on the floor soaking wet and topless, while Harris repeatedly slapped her face and pounded on her chest as part of the resuscitation attempt, and Cameron demanded multiple takes to get the performance exactly right. During one particular take, Harris was screaming at Mastrantonio to wake up and slapping her across the face when he noticed a light on the camera indicating that the film had run out, but nobody from the crew had bothered to call cut or tell the actors to stop. This meant that Harris had been physically hitting Mastrantonio, and she had been enduring the uncomfortable scene for absolutely no reason, since nothing was actually being recorded. When Mastrantonio realized what had happened, she immediately stood up and shouted at the crew, "We are not animals," before walking off the set in anger and refusing to return. The incident revealed just how poorly the cast felt they were being treated during the production, as the crew was apparently willing to let the actors continue performing a physically demanding and emotionally draining scene even after the camera had stopped filming. Ed Harris later recounted the incident in interviews, explaining that when it came time to film additional shots from the scene that focused on his face, Mastrantonio still refused to participate, which meant he had to perform his parts of the scene yelling at thin air instead of his co-star. Fact 7. Crew nicknamed it The Abuse. As the production dragged on for months and the working conditions became increasingly unbearable, the cast and crew of The Abyss developed a dark sense of humor about their miserable situation by creating several bitter nicknames for the film they were making. The most popular alternative title that people started using around the set was The Abuse, which was a play on the movie's actual title, but also a very direct commentary on how the cast and crew felt they were being treated during the grueling 6-month shoot. Someone even went so far as to erase the words "The Abyss" from a blackboard on set and replace it with "The Abuse" as a form of protest. Other creative variations that circulated among the exhausted and frustrated production members included "Son of Abyss," which made it sound like a terrible sequel that nobody wanted, and "Life's Abyss and Then You Dive," which was a dark twist on the common saying, "Life's a bitch and then you die." These nicknames weren't just jokes that people laughed about in private, but actually became part of the everyday language used on set, with cast and crew members openly referring to the production by these derogatory names. The fact that people felt comfortable enough to publicly mock the film they were working on shows just how low morale had sunk during the production. At one point, the frustration became so overwhelming that Ed Harris recalled coming back to the dressing rooms one day to find that people had started throwing couches out the windows and smashing holes in the walls as a way to release their pent-up anger and stress. These nicknames and acts of destruction were essentially a form of passive-aggressive rebellion against James Cameron's demanding directing style and the dangerous, exhausting conditions that everyone was being forced to endure. Fact 8. James Cameron also nearly drowned. James Cameron wasn't just putting his actors in danger during the filming of The Abyss, as the director himself came terrifyingly close to drowning in an incident that revealed just how reckless the production had become. Cameron was working at the bottom of the 35-foot deep tank with 40 pounds of weight strapped to his body to keep him steady for filming, and he had made the dangerous decision to refuse the presence of safety divers who were specifically assigned to monitor people underwater, which the crew called angels. During one particular shoot, the assistant director, who was supposed to be keeping track of Cameron's oxygen levels, suddenly left his post and went off the clock without telling anyone, leaving Cameron with no one monitoring his air supply. When Cameron took a breath and got nothing, he immediately checked his pressure gauge and saw that it read 0, meaning he had completely run out of oxygen. He released his helmet, harness, and the heavy weights and began swimming frantically toward the surface to get air before he drowned. A safety diver spotted Cameron in distress and swam over to help, offering him a backup regulator to breathe from, but the equipment was faulty and only caused Cameron to inhale a mouthful of water instead of air. The safety diver, not understanding what was happening and thinking Cameron was just panicking, actually grabbed onto the director and held him underwater to try to calm him down. With his lungs burning and water in his throat, Cameron had no choice but to punch the safety diver directly in the face to break free from his grip, and he finally managed to swim to the surface just in time to avoid drowning. Fact 9. Actors were told to pee in their wetsuits. In one of the most bizarre and unsanitary directives ever given on a major film production, James Cameron actually instructed the cast and crew of The Abyss to urinate directly into their wetsuits while they were underwater instead of taking bathroom breaks. Cameron's reasoning for this unusual order was purely practical from a time management perspective, as he wanted to avoid the lengthy process of having actors and crew members exit the water, remove their wetsuits, use the bathroom, put everything back on, and then descend back into the tanks to resume filming. Every bathroom break could potentially waste 30 minutes or more of valuable shooting time, and with the production already running behind schedule and over budget, Cameron felt that keeping everyone in the water for as long as possible was the most efficient solution. However, this decision created a disgusting chain reaction of problems that actually made the filming conditions even worse than they already were. The urine from dozens of cast and crew members who were spending 10 to 12 hours a day in the water created the perfect environment for algae to bloom at an accelerated rate, turning the water murky and reducing visibility to dangerously low levels. This forced the production team to dump even more chlorine into the tanks to kill off the algae and keep the water clear enough for the cameras, which in turn caused more severe chemical burns and hair bleaching for everyone who had to work underwater. The entire situation became a vicious cycle where Cameron's attempt to save time by having people urinated in the water actually created additional problems that required more chemical treatment, which then caused more physical harm to the cast and crew who were already suffering from the grueling conditions. Fact 10. The water tentacle was cinema's first photorealistic CGI character. The most technically groundbreaking aspect of The Abyss wasn't the dangerous underwater filming conditions, but rather a brief sequence featuring a column of water that explores the oil rig and mimics the faces of the characters, which became a pivotal moment in the history of computer-generated imagery. James Cameron approached Industrial Light and Magic, the legendary special effects company founded by George Lucas, to create what he called a pseudopod, which was essentially a tentacle made entirely of water that could move and change shape. The pressure was intense because Cameron gave ILM only 24 hours to come up with a test showing what this water creature could look like, which was an incredibly tight deadline for such an ambitious visual effect. The team at ILM, informally, nicknamed the creature the Water Weenie during development, and they spent 6 months creating just 75 seconds of computer graphics for the final film. What made this achievement so significant was that the water tentacle became the first photorealistic, computer-generated character in cinema history to interact convincingly with live actors in real time. The crew at ILM had to digitally scan Ed Harris's face 8 times and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's face 12 times to create the moment where the water creature mimics their expressions. Cameron was so uncertain about whether the visual effects would work that he deliberately wrote the scene so it could be completely removed from the movie if the technology failed. But when he saw the final results, he was amazed by how good it looked. The techniques pioneered for this water tentacle sequence laid the groundwork for the liquid metal villain in Terminator 2 Judgment Day just 2 years later, which took the technology even further and changed action movies forever. Fact 11. UK release banned over rat scene. The controversial rat breathing scene that was filmed back in 1989 continues to cause problems for The Abyss more than 3 decades later, as it led to the complete cancellation of the film's 4K ultra-high-definition Blu-ray release in the United Kingdom in 2024. When the film was originally submitted for classification in 1989, the British Board of Film Classification sought expert advice about the scene where a rat is submerged in liquid and forced to breathe it, and the experts determined that the scene violated the Cinematograph Films Animals Act because it constituted the cruel infliction of terror on an animal. The original UK theatrical version had the rat scene cut out entirely to comply with the law, and for years British audiences could only watch a censored version of the film. When Disney, which now owns the rights to The Abyss, prepared to release a brand new 4K remaster of the film in 2023, they contacted the British Board of Film Classification to see if attitudes had changed after all these years. The board consulted with animal welfare experts again and confirmed that their position had not changed at all, and they would still require the rat scene to be removed before they could grant the film a certificate for release in the UK. Disney was apparently willing to comply with the request and create a version without the controversial scene, but James Cameron's production company Lightstorm Entertainment completely refused to authorize any cuts to the film. This created a stalemate where the British censors would not approve the film with the scene included, but Cameron would not allow the scene to be removed, which resulted in the entire 4K physical media release being cancelled for UK audiences. Fact 12. Orson Scott Card's novelization became canon. James Cameron took an unusual approach to the novelization of The Abyss by hiring Orson Scott Card, the acclaimed science fiction author who had won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards for his novel Ender's Game, and giving him unprecedented creative freedom to expand the story beyond what appeared in the screenplay. Instead of just asking Card to write a simple book version of the script like most movie novelizations, Cameron specifically requested that Card create a real science fiction novel that would add depth and context to the characters and their world. Card took this assignment seriously and wrote extensive backstories for the three main characters, exploring their childhoods and the formative experiences that shaped who they became as adults. He created detailed histories explaining how Bud developed his leadership abilities and his complicated relationship with the ocean, how Lindsay became both a brilliant engineer and someone with a difficult personality, and how Coffee transformed into a soldier capable of extreme loyalty but also dangerous fanaticism. Cameron was so impressed with the character work that Card had done that he made the highly unusual decision to have the actors Ed Harris, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, and Michael Biehn actually read the first 2 chapters of Card's novel manuscript before they began filming. The idea was that by reading these detailed backstories that Card had created, the actors would gain a deeper understanding of their characters' inner motivations and psychological complexity, which would then inform their performances throughout the movie. This collaborative process between the novelist and the filmmakers was extremely rare in Hollywood, and it resulted in Card's novelization being considered one of the most canon and legitimate tie-in books ever created for a major motion picture. Fact 13. Cameron watched dailies. While decompressing, James Cameron and the underwater camera crew spent such extreme amounts of time at dangerous depths during the filming of The Abyss that they were required to undergo a medical process called decompression to avoid a potentially fatal condition known as the bends. While the actors typically worked at around 33 feet below the surface and could return to the surface without major medical concerns, Cameron and his 26-person underwater crew routinely descended to 50 feet or deeper and stayed submerged for 5 hours at a stretch while operating cameras and equipment. When you spend that much time at those depths, nitrogen gas builds up in your bloodstream, and if you surface too quickly, that nitrogen can form bubbles in your blood and tissues, causing excruciating pain, paralysis, or even death. To prevent this from happening, Cameron and his crew had to spend as long as 2 hours hanging from hoses halfway up the tank, breathing pure oxygen in a slow decompression process before they could safely return to normal air pressure at the surface. Rather than simply waiting around and wasting time during these lengthy decompression sessions, Cameron came up with a creative solution to stay productive by having someone set up equipment so he could watch the dailies, which are the raw footage clips that were shot earlier in the day. The most unusual part of this setup was that Cameron would hang completely upside down while watching the footage through a glass window in the decompression chamber, because this inverted position helped relieve the intense stress and pain in his shoulders that came from wearing the heavy underwater helmet for hours on end while filming at the bottom of the tank. Fact 14. The movie set was abandoned for 19 years. After filming finally wrapped in December 1988, 20th Century Fox was faced with the enormous task of dismantling all the elaborate underwater sets that had been constructed inside the Cherokee nuclear power plant. But the production had already gone $4 million over budget, and the studio made an unusual financial decision. Rather than spending additional money to properly deconstruct and remove the massive sets from the abandoned nuclear facility, Fox simply decided to leave everything exactly where it was and walk away from the entire operation. The tanks were drained of their 7.5 million gallons of water, but all the physical structures, equipment, and set pieces remained in place inside the containment buildings. Before abandoning the location, the production company did take the precaution of placing warning labels on the structures that clearly stated the sets remained the property of 20th Century Fox, and that any photographic or video recording of them was strictly prohibited. For the next 19 years, the elaborate underwater world that had caused so much suffering and nearly killed multiple people sat empty and slowly deteriorating inside the desolate industrial site. The abandoned sets became something of a legend among urban explorers and film enthusiasts, with some adventurous fans making illegal pilgrimages to the site to see the decaying remains of one of the most notorious film productions in Hollywood history, though anyone caught trespassing faced fines and potential legal trouble. The sets finally met their end in September 2007 when Duke Energy announced plans to build a new nuclear power plant called the William States Lee III Nuclear Generating Station on the same property, and the company demolished all the remaining abyss structures to make way for the new construction project. Fact 15. Both lead actors refused to discuss it. The traumatic experience of making The Abyss left such deep psychological scars on the two lead actors that both Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio have essentially refused to speak about the film for decades, which is extremely unusual in an industry where actors typically promote their work enthusiastically, regardless of the behind-the-scenes challenges. Before the film was released in August 1989, there were reports coming out of South Carolina claiming that Ed Harris was so upset by the physical demands and James Cameron's harsh directing style that he had told people he would refuse to help promote the movie at all. Harris initially denied these rumors and did participate in some promotional activities when the film first came out, but after that initial press tour was over, he made his feelings about the production crystal clear with a statement that has become legendary in Hollywood. Harris declared, "I'm never talking about it and never will," and he has kept that promise for over 3 decades, refusing to discuss his experiences on The Abyss in virtually any interview or public appearance since then. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio was only slightly less emphatic in her assessment of the production, but her quote was equally damning when she said, "The Abyss was a lot of things. Fun to make is not one of them." The most telling detail about how badly the experience damaged the relationship between Cameron and his lead actors is that neither Harris nor Mastrantonio has ever worked with the director again on any project, despite the fact that Cameron went on to become one of the most successful and powerful directors in Hollywood history. This is particularly notable given that Cameron has a tendency to work with the same actors repeatedly across multiple films.